Welcome to Because the Beatles, the podcast about the Beatles, everything about the Beatles, 24/8. I'm Erica.
And I'm Allison. And before we start, be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, or stream us on Spotify and YouTube. If you're enjoying BC the Beatles, feel free to leave us a preferably 5-star review so other Beatlemaniacs can find us.
And don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter/X, and TikTok. We'll be posting videos, photos, and more from this episode and beyond. And you can also email us at bcthebeatles@gmail.com.
Yes, and this is some breaking ass news we've got today.
Oh my God, we had to interrupt all of our regular episodes because the trailer for Midas Man finally came out this week. Oh
After how many years have we been talking about Midas Man?
It's been since at least 2020, and they had 2 or 3 different directors, all of these problems, COVID interruptions. We never thought this thing was going to get finished.
No, never. And, when we saw like production stills from the set earlier this year, I was like, okay, this is cool and all, but it's never going to come out. So when the trailer dropped, it was a minor miracle. I was just like, I couldn't believe it. I had to watch it like 40 times.
Mm-hmm.
So we had to, immediately we had to come on here and make a special episode and talk about our first impressions of this trailer. And if you guys aren't familiar, Midas Man is the new feature film about the life of Brian Epstein. And like Erica said, it's been in talks for years and years and years, and lots of setbacks. So it's a very exciting day. The trailer finally came out.
And we're all going to get to see it because it's going to be in theaters in a wide release starting August 29th. So it's not going to be confined to festivals or anything.
Oh my God, I can't wait. I'm going to cry. I can't believe it's so soon. I heard October, but I guess, wow, they moved it up. I'll take it.
I'm excited about it.
I am too. I'm super excited. And oh my gosh, should we talk about our impression of the trailer, or should we actually talk about the elephant in the room?
Yeah, there's that.
Yeah, there is an elephant in the room that we need to address about this trailer. So, and it actually segues nicely into our little commentary on the trailer because it's right in the beginning in the trailer.
Yeah, it started off with the Brian character played by Jacob Fortune Lloyd introducing himself to, I think, John Lennon and saying, "Hello, my name is Brian Epstein." And if you'll notice, that was beeped out because they said it wrong.
I know. If we played the clip here, we'd bleep out Mr. Fortune Lloyd because that's not how you say it. It's Epstein. And today, you guys are going to get to hear, if you haven't already, our episode about exactly why it is Epstein. And the Too Long Didn't Read. We'll present you with all the evidence. But why do we give a shit? Because Brian gave a shit. And Brian intentionally pronounced his name Epstein. The family's name is Epstein. Queenie Epstein, Clive Epstein, all Epsteins, but Brian was Epstein, and that was very, very important to him. So that, it started off a little rocky. I got to say, the trailer, a little rocky.
But I would say that was the only thing that I really took issue with. It's a big issue. It's a big issue, but at the same time, after coming off the heels of that Doctor Who Beatles thing and the way they presented the Beatles, I was expecting the worst. And we didn't get it.
Yeah, the Beatles guys, the guys playing the Beatles are, they're not like dead ringers. Let's just, call a spade here. But I was very encouraged by the way the John Lennon character, like when Brian said, "I'm Brian, you know what," the wrong name. And then John said, "Well, I'm John Lennon." I was very encouraged by the way he played the character. I thought he captured a lot of John's like humor in that.
It was similar to me, like Backbeat, where they don't imitate the Beatles.
Yeah.
But they've got the energy of how we perceive the Beatles at that time.
Sure.
I think that's all we need to make it feel realistic, is that they're feeling authentic. And I like the way what we saw of these characters came out. I especially liked that we see Pete Best.
I thought the Pete Best character looked the most like Pete Best. Like, I thought he was the most like his Beatle. He really, really looked like Pete Best. So that's kind of great.
Pete Best has more room for imagination, too, because we haven't seen as much of Pete Best on film, the real Pete Best at that time. So
very true.
He doesn't have to be exactly like Pete might have been for us to really believe that he's like Pete. But if you
Yeah.
look at John Lennon, we've seen so much of John, Paul, George, and Ringo at that time that in film and speaking, singing, that it's so hard to not give an immediate comparison and just give in to the suspension of disbelief.
Yeah.
But as far as being like them, though, goes, if I didn't know how expensive it was to get the rights to Beatles things, when they played Besame Mucho over part of the trailer, I could have sworn it was actually Paul McCartney.
Is it not? I thought it was the version from the BBC. Is it not that?
I didn't know because first I was thinking, man, that's expensive and this is an indie film. How much could that have possibly cost? Oh my God.
Yeah, I don't know. I That's a great question. I really thought it sounded that way, but you're right. It would be very expensive to license.
And I was trying to research it, but this movie still has so little information out about it that I couldn't find anything about the music or the music rights.
Hmm. Listeners, if you have an opinion, like let us know what you think because I could go either way on it. It really sounded like it, but yeah, at the same time, it's like, man, what a budget you'd have to have.
I mean, it was used as like an overlay song, but at the same time, we saw Paul singing it
Yeah.
in a frame or two. So they're using it as something that's coming out of this guy's mouth.
So it must be in the film.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, yeah, now I'm very intrigued to see what other kind of like Beatle-esque music we're gonna get, in the actual film. That's gonna be really, really interesting.
Yeah. I think another thing that we're going to see is not just the relationship between Brian and the Beatles, but the whole Liverpool music scene.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So God, I have so many thoughts, y'all. I have so many thoughts. There's a part in the trailer where he's sort of walking down a set of stairs and he's name checking all of his artistes. And one thing that I think is very intriguing about this clip is because he's addressing the camera directly. And so I'm wondering if we're going to get like a bunch of asides or a bunch of like breaking in the fourth wall in this film because he's talking about, yeah, he name checks Jerry and the Pacemakers, Billy J and the Dakotas, the Foremost, and Tommy Quickly. And you see them sort of behind him on the stairs as he's walking down, which is like so exciting because I hope we get to see, and obviously Scylla. I'm very excited to see if we're going to get screen time with any of his other acts.
I hope so. I hope so. I'm still hoping for Johnny Hutch in some point.
Oh my God, Johnny Hutch.
Anywhere.
Yes.
I want to see this character come to life.
I know. I know. God, we need to have somebody playing Johnny Hutch big time.
Now I'm wondering if he's got a bunch of asides, if he's like the Ferris Bueller of Liverpool.
Oh my gosh, I hope so. Brian is the Ferris Bueller of Liverpool. That's amazing. But yeah, I'm so excited. I was just very excited to see Scylla, although, we all know Sharon Smith is our girl.
Yeah. But this girl looked pretty good.
Yeah, we can't always have Sheridan. So I'm very open to loving our new Scylla.
What did you think of our new Brian?
Oh, well, isn't that the question of
Mhm.
the century here? Okay. So when I heard about the casting and I had seen like Queen's Gambit, and I thought he was decent, but I had a lot of reservations. I was like, I thought he was a little bit too young looking. I don't know. His features aren't the same as Brian. He's a little like tall, dark, and handsome. Brian was obviously he was very, very handsome, but it just didn't look similar to me.
Mhm.
But I've got to say, seeing him in the trailer, I think he's very Brianish. Like I was very impressed with his mannerisms, like little movements, like Brian at the press conference, the way that Brian would hold his head sort of at a certain angle. Like it's obviously he studied a lot of footage of Brian.
At 1 minute and 51 seconds, he's channeling Brian. His posture and his head are exact. Like I've seen that picture of Brian a million times.
Yes, I know. I had so many moments like that where it's like I've seen that photo, like I've seen that clip from XYZ, like as somebody who loves Brian so much. I was impressed and I was impressed the way he spoke.
Mhm.
I thought he really got Ryan's cadence down. I'm hopeful after seeing this. I'm hopeful that he's going to be able to sell it, Brian.
I am too. He reminded me of one of those apps where like you make yourself into a Disney character or whatever. He was like the Disneyfied Brian. Like he was
Oh
a
my
little
God.
bit more like Gastonish than Brian ever
Oh
was.
my
A little bit
God.
more
He is
cocky.
Gastonish.
I mean, he's absolutely gorgeous. And so is Brian, but he's got this like cocksure sort of attitude sometimes that I don't associate with Brian.
It was funny. I was watching the trailer today at work at my desk on my lunch break. And I have a photo of Brian at my desk. Yes, I do. I have a photo of Brian at my desk. And I was watching it and I sort of looked over. I was like, Brian, what do you think of this? Like, I'm sure Brian would be like, oh my God, they have this beautiful man playing me.
He would be so happy.
He would be super happy. Yeah.
I mean, I'll be happy to look at that guy for 2 hours.
I love the little attention to detail. Obviously, if you've seen the trailer, you've noticed they got the polka dot scarf.
1 minute, 39 seconds.
There you go.
Take a look. It's great.
Yeah, so they've got the polka dot. They know about the polka dot. I'm very hopeful. I liked that. I'm guessing that the character that we see walking with Brian to or from the cavern, it was Alistair Taylor, called him Mr. Brian and not Mr. Bleep,
Mm,
So maybe we'll get a little bit less of the last name error.
I hope so.
Maybe they'll just call him Epi the whole time and it'll be fine.
Yeah. And then a couple of other relationships we're going to see. Emily Watson is going to play his mother, Queenie.
Yeah, which is so lovely. That was such good casting.
I think they're going to do justice to that relationship and to her defending him at a time when being gay was a felony. There's a scene in the trailer where she's defending him to, I would assume, his father.
Yeah, I think it was to his dad. Another thing, and I definitely want to touch on the gay aspects of the trailer too, because we got to see a lot of those private moments in Brian's life. Another moment in the trailer that has me really, really interested is where Brian appears to explode over something that Clive, his brother, has done. And I was like, what? Because I can't think of anything offhand. After Brian died, Clive was very influential in NEMS. He sort of took over for Brian as far as the business end of NEMS went. Obviously did not manage the Beatles or anything like that, but sort of just stepped in that role. But having read books on Brian and obviously studied Brian's life for a very long time, I can't think of a single incident that would have Brian blowing up like that on Clive. I'm looking forward to seeing what that's all about. And if something like Clive's trying to take over the company, that's bullshit that never happened. My thing is with Brian's life, it's been done before. It makes me crazy that people make it very black and white, where he's either a saint or an asshole. He was a tyrant or he was a pussycat. I hate that. And I hate sometimes how people fantasize about his life. I'm thinking about a particular book that I do not care for and is also a big perpetuator of the bad name pronunciation. So I'm really hoping this movie does not take it to that degree. I'm very curious to see what he's exactly blowing up at Clive about.
And it looks like that middle period of his life, they're showing both of those sides. They're showing him in situations where he gets beat up. And then they're also showing him at dinner with Ed Sullivan.
Played by Jay Leno, of all people.
That's weird. I don't know if I like that very much. I thought that was really, really strange.
So weird. So weird. I mean, the cameos look very interesting in this.
Jay Leno, but I loved Eddie Susie Izzard as Alan Williams.
I love that. It's so niche. That's so niche. I'm so here for these little niche references. Like, of all people to play Alan Williams, like they get a big star.
I know it's such a small part.
I know.
It looks so authentic. And Alan Williams is saying his famous line about not touching the Beatles with a fucking barge pole. It's so good.
See, that's why I really hope this is mostly based in actual events and it's not hyperbolized, because you do have little moments like that where it's like, yeah, that's the famous line and that's hilarious.
I don't know how much, if any, cooperation they had with any member of the family or people in Liverpool, but they feel at least that they tried to get a lot of things right.
Yeah.
And so we'll see if that pans out. But it's not every day you hear about the foremost in a trailer.
Yeah, in a trailer of all things.
Great.
I know, it's so great. But yeah, so as you referenced, there's a lot of the gay undertones or overtones, really, of Brian's life in this. His various lovers who blackmailed him, who abused him. There was a clip that alluded to the famous incident where his lover, Diz Gillespie, who is called Tex, I think, in this. The last name is like another jazz guy. Diz Gillespie famously stole a briefcase of Brian's full of like contracts and like lots of important papers and that kind of thing. And so he blackmailed Brian over that. And we see that sort of incident play out a little bit in the trailer. I don't know. I just kept thinking about the Brian character in the Scylla miniseries and
Mm,
how tragic, my God, how tragic that was. And I'm
yeah.
wondering if we'll get comparatively, what degree we'll get to like that portrayal of him.
There is a chance that if the character is so cocksure, if he's the Gaston version of Brian, that the pain will be over dramatic or unreal in some way. I don't feel like it's definitely going to go there, but that's a concern that I have
Yeah.
about playing the emotions so big when we're talking about these people who really did keep everything buttoned up.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Brian had to.
What did you think of the last moments of the trailer?
Okay, so the trailer ends with Brian sort of standing on the famous Abbey Road crosswalk. It's empty otherwise. He's just sort of standing there. And I thought it was poignant, but also, I don't know, it was strange because obviously Brian was dead when they made Abbey Road. So to see him sort of in that moment was weird. So I'm interested to see how they'll use that in the film, that moment.
Hmm. The way that the dialogue was over that was that Brian was telling the Beatles, "You're a hard act to follow." And then it cuts to him alone on the Abbey Road crosswalk with an echoey voice, John saying, "No, you are." I thought that was kind of chilling.
Yeah, oh yeah, I just got chills actually thinking about it.
I will say that this is the one thing where it did bring back the Doctor Who episode to me.
Oh, really?
That fucking 28 IF Beetle is still parked there. It's been there since 1963, apparently.
Oh my God. That guy must have so many parking tickets. That Beetle's been
Uh,
there for like, 60 years. Like, geez.
How do you get the same space every time? Parking magic.
That's called parking mojo. I wish I had that here in LA, man. Give me that kind of parking mojo. So overall, I think I am very intrigued. I want more. I want to see more. I want to hear more. I want to explore this movie so much. I am so glad that we don't have to wait that long for it to come out because I think that would be torture. And I'm sure we will be talking about it ad nauseum. You guys are going to get fucking sick of hearing about this movie because it's just been such a long road to get here. And as somebody who Brian has had such a massive impact on my life, it's like I just want to see the best for him. And I'm going to try to overlook the whole name issue because if you just let that wreck the whole thing, it's never going to get off the ground. What do you think, Erica? Are you excited after seeing this?
I'm really excited about it. I did not think that it was going to look nearly as good. The stills did not seem all that impressive to me.
Yeah, agreed.
And taking 3 years with it in limbo wasn't all that impressive either. So I didn't think it was going to be much of anything. And it just popped up on my Instagram today out of nowhere. And I was so excited. Like it was such a delightful surprise.
Yes, it really was. When I saw it on TikTok earlier this morning and I was like, what is this? Is this real? Like I couldn't believe it until you sent it to me and I was like, oh my God, it is real.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm excited. I want to talk about it as much as we can. Anybody from the production who might want to talk to us.
You know where to find us. We're everywhere. Yes, we would love to. We would love to promo the hell out of this.
Yep.
And as it gets closer, I'm sure we will. And just so excited for this. Brian is going to get his moment, I hope. And not a moment too soon.
Yeah. And I'm glad they released it in August, the anniversary month of his death.
Right, 2 days after his death anniversary. So I can't imagine that's coincidence. That's probably very planned. Yeah. And I'm excited to see if they do promo events because I could see that being tied into maybe something in Liverpool, like we saw over the weekend for the John Lennon Mind Games box. They had the
Hmm.
scavenger hunt. Like I could see them doing something fun.
Oh, I hope they do something around the statue, maybe.
That would be amazing. I mean, the statue was part of the scavenger hunt too. So that was really special that Brian was included in that. And of course, the statue has him with his polka dot cravat and
Hmm.
looking very handsome going to the thing. So I hope that Brian is finally having his moment.
Me too. I'm very much looking forward to the press junket.
Same, same.
But of course, we did notice that one thing.
We did one little thing.
And we are going to do our part, whatever we can, in making sure that it's rectified in people's minds, even if it can never be rectified in the film. So today, we wanted to re argue our case by bringing back our episode on how to really pronounce Brian's last name. And not only that, we will follow that with a delightful song that was sent to us by a listener 2 years later that will help us all remember the right way to say it.
So there's no excuses after this episode because you've got all the facts and you've got a delightful little ditty to remember.
Mm-hmm.
And it will be stuck in your head all day. Sorry, not sorry.
It will. It will. And we'll post it again on our socials so that you can listen to it whenever you like.
Yes, exactly. And he made a fun little cover art for it too. So we'll repost that as well. So without further ado, have a listen to our very special episode about how to really pronounce Brian Epstein's last name.
Today is something that we've been wanting to do since I think we started talking about doing a podcast, which was many, many moons ago, because it's been kind of a hot topic, but it sort of reached a fever pitch recently when a video went live on YouTube that purported to give a definitive answer of how to pronounce the Beatles manager's last name, and purposely not saying it, although if you've listened to the podcast before, you know how we say it.
This is a bit controversial. It's very important to us, and we wanted to unearth some evidence and some very new testimonial that's come to light to make our case.
This is a very, very big deal to me. You guys know, you can listen to our episode. I talk about Brian pretty much every episode because he's literally my favorite person in history. He's a reason why I work in the music business. My cat is Epi. He's literally my favorite fucking person. So this is a very, very big deal to me, and I'm going to try to keep it cool.
You're going to try, but you're not.
Yeah.
So do tell, what is the controversy here?
Okay. All right. So taking a deep breath. So the controversy is how to pronounce Brian's last name. First of all, there's a whole charge about pronouncing it Epstein. The correct way to pronounce it, it's Epstein. Brian Epstein is the correct way to pronounce his last name. So we're going to tell you why. And like Erica said, we have lots and lots to back this up. But before we start, full disclosure, the video on YouTube, which you can feel free to watch, just search how to pronounce Brian Epstein's name or Vivek Tiwari. Vivek is a friend of ours. Hopefully he still will be after this episode. But he wrote the graphic novel based on Brian's life called The Fifth Beatle, working on a miniseries about Brian's life. And he's probably the one leading the charge most on Epstein.
If you don't know the context, he was being interviewed about his work and about Brian, and a large part of this video was taken up with his defense of why he thinks that Brian's last name is pronounced Epstein.
Exactly.
One of the main arguments for Epstein is that Brian's family pronounced it Epstein, so why wouldn't Brian? Why would that not be correct?
Well, that's a great question. And that's a main argument that Vivek makes in the video. According to Queenie, who is Brian's mom, matriarch of the family, one of Brian's best friends his whole life, according to her, the family name is Epstein. My son is Brian Epstein. It's ridiculous to think it would be Brian Epstein. The truth is, Vivek is 100% right. The family name, Queenie, Harry, and Clive, Brian's brother, are Epstein. That's their last name. However, Brian deliberately changed the pronunciation of his name. And you can find that verified in many, many Beatles books. Lots of anecdotal evidence from people who knew him the best that concede that Brian changed his last name. Some people say he wanted it to sound more American. I've also heard that he wanted it to sound less Jewish, but I don't think it sounds less Jewish. That is a historical fact, that Brian changed the pronunciation of his last name. So when you say the family name is Epstein, you're 100% correct. But if you're also agreeing that he changed the pronunciation of his name, which again is historical fact, then it has to be Epstein, right?
Right.
There's two texts that I could dig up, and I, have pretty much every book about Brian, all like three of them. The first one is a biography by Ray Coleman, which is more or less a definitive, I guess, called The Man Who Made the Beatles. It's out of print, but you can find it on eBay or something. It's pretty much the only thing about Brian out there.
Definitive because it's only.
Exactly. So in that biography, Ray Coleman has it backwards. He says that the family is Epstein. Brian changed it to Epstein when he was in the army. That's not true because, as we know, the family is Epstein.
Right. And they've said that over and over again.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you can find Clive saying, it's out there. And so there's another book called Standing in the Wings. I think it's like My Life with Brian Epstein, the Beatles, Liverpool, etc., by a guy called Joe Flannery, who was a friend of Brian's. He was sort of in the scene. And he's still around, he appears at the Beatles story in Liverpool every once in a while and does events and book signings. So in his book, and he's actually championed it, like Vivek, on YouTube. You can find him talking about how it's Epstein, not Epstein. But again, he also says that Brian changed the pronunciation of his name. So again, if the family is Epstein, then he couldn't change his name to Epstein. It's already Epstein. So he changed it to Epstein. That's why that argument, the family name argument, is deeply flawed and in fact incorrect.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And let's talk about the people who knew him during the time when he was calling himself Epstein.
Yes, let's do that, because another one of Vivek's points in his video is that they were just wrong. Everybody from John Lennon to George Martin to whoever, including Brian's secretary and first U.S. visit, who stands directly behind him and says the manager's name is Brian Epstein. And Brian, the camera's on his face. He doesn't even blink, nothing. So here's the thing. His close colleagues and his friends said Epstein in his presence, obviously. So why would he not have corrected them?
Of course, especially the people who worked with him as his official representatives. Brian was not a man who took second best or put up with people slacking or being lazy. This was one of those things. If he introduced himself as Epstein, he would have wanted his secretary and anybody speaking on his behalf to do exactly the same, and he wouldn't have hesitated to correct that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Brian, especially towards the end of his life and once the Beatles really got rolling, his secretaries and associates have definitely said he could be very volatile. And Brian was a person, as you said, that never wanted second best. He always wanted to be presented well. He was very theatrical. We know that. That's why he created elements of the Beatles where they bow at the same time, like all that. He would not have allowed a mispronunciation of his name because that's part of his presentation. Also, going back to point one, if he changed his name, the pronunciation of his name, which is, again, historical fact, he would have told them outright how to say his name. There's really no argument to be made there. It's by John Lennon, and we're going to go through the list. Trust me, we've got a lot more evidence than this. This is all anecdotal. We've got hard facts coming up, folks. But those closest to him, he would never have allowed them to say it wrong. John, specifically, obviously, Brian and John had a very close relationship. Make of it what you will, but they were very close. And there was a lot of love between them. But John could also really take the piss out of Brian.
For sure.
And he says Brian Epstein. We've all heard the tape in the anthology where he says he was a beautiful guy, Brian Epstein. And even after his death, in the infamous video where John is interviewed after Brian's death, he says Epstein. And not even John would be that sacrilegious to needle Brian after his death. He would have respected him. And at that point, what would be the point? John was not that kind of guy.
Right. And I also think that John obviously would have known how to say his name. And if John wanted to make fun of his name or make a play on his name, he would have done a word play like how he would call Peter Noon Peter No One.
Yeah.
He would have done something more clever than to just use the family pronunciation to annoy him.
Exactly. And there's another part in Joe Flannery's book, Standing in the Wings, where he says that Brian would, quote unquote, check you right away when you mispronounce his name. So that goes back to why didn't he say that to the secretary? But also, he would have probably said it to John over and over and over. And I think if there were a moment for John to concede to Brian and say Epstein, if that's the way Brian wanted it, it would have been after he died. And that would have been something reverential to Brian. It says Epstein. And I think that indicates that that's what he was called.
Right. And by 1967, there wouldn't have been any question about this.
Exactly. There's also an instance of this sort of thing when Brian appeared on a TV show called What's My Line? And I love the show. I'm a big fan of What's My Line. Bennett Cerf is my guy, which probably means nothing to a lot of you guys, but go watch it. I think it's on like GSN at like 2 a.m. or something. So it's an old game show where the point was there would be like a mystery guest or a person that comes on every week and a panel of quote unquote stars. A lot of them were writers for the New York Times and book authors and personalities. They would have to guess what that person does for a job. So the host is John Daly, and every week there's a mystery guest, which is usually a celebrity, and the panelists are blindfolded. So Brian went on one week, and the panelists were not blindfolded. So he came on and signed in as Mr. X and sat down next to John Daly, and the game starts, and they start guessing, are you in the music business? And it's all yes or no questions. And so Paul Anka passes because he's like, I think I know him, which of course he would. Bennett Cerf, who's finally like, are you associated with those 4 young, long-haired, blah, blah, blah. And of course, that's it. So when John Daly, the host, then introduces Brian, he says, Mr. Barry Epstein. And it makes my soul crumble because Brian, under his breath, says Brian. And it makes me like emotional. I'm getting like really upset talking about it because he's just so like it's just so sad. Like, why do you say Barry Epstein? Anyway, but the point is, why wouldn't he have said Epstein? I know that it's maybe a little bit more cringeworthy that he fucked up his first name so badly, but also, like, why wouldn't he said like Brian Epstein?
You'd say them both. You would say them both.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's bad enough if the host fucks up one, but it's two. It's, you know, you would say them both. Anyway, so that didn't happen. But you can look that up too. It's on YouTube. Brian's adorable in it and perfect and wonderful. But that moment, it just literally takes my breath away. It's so cringeworthy.
Yeah. So I think we've made a pretty good argument for why we feel there's evidence out there.
Again, this is all anecdotal, but maybe we should get into some hard evidence here.
It's not just us. It's not just our feelings. There's a pretty significant number of people who have been recorded saying Epstein during the time when Brian was managing the Beatles. The list of people who said Epstein include John Lennon,
George Martin,
Viv Jones,
worked for Brian.
Yes.
Marianne Faithfull,
Murray the K,
the host of the UK Tonight Show, right in front of Brian's face as he was interviewing him.
Ivor Davis, our guest from last week.
Yeah, love him. Brian's secretary and first U.S. visit, as we've already gone over.
Mark Lewison, we checked with him.
Yeah, we'll get into that in a second. Paul Anka, who would know?
He would. Billy J. Kramer, contemporary of the Beatles.
And also managed by Brian. And Don Dannerman of The Circle, which was Brian's only American act that he managed. So another one of Brian's artistes. And also, we've got evidence in the song What About Brian Epstein, also known as Brian Epstein's Blues, which was a demo from the White Album sessions in 1968, all Brian Epstein. And we'll play a clip of that maybe at the end of this.
So we've got a little montage for you of people who have said Epstein.
Brian was a beautiful guy, Brian Epstein, and he was an intuitive, theatrical guy, and he knew we had something he presented us well.
And I said to Brian Epstein, when we do the next session, I mean, I don't want to interfere with the Beatles and what you're doing with them, that's fine, but I'm going to provide the drummer.
Brian Epstein's strongest card is that he actually cared for the community he served.
And we are very happy to welcome Brian Epstein of England.
Brian Epstein, the man who built the Beatles into a cult.
The manager's name is Brian Epstein.
So let's go to Honolulu, London, and Mr. Brian Epstein.
He says he actually knows Brian Epstein.
Come on, should I call him?
I call him.
Something's always bothered me. I just can't explain. Why isn't Brian Epstein in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame?
That's a pretty hefty list right there.
Yes, indeed.
I think The Circle, if nothing else, would say that, that's somebody who never knew him in the Liverpool days. The members of The Circle didn't know him then. So they know him as he introduced himself after he was already manager of the Beatles.
That's a really good point. That's a really strong argument right there. I didn't even think about that.
But we have one argument that's even stronger.
Yes. Okay. So here's the thing. I think this is all very good and true and proof evidence here. So 2 things. Number one, this was, I don't know, a while ago, I guess, but I was sort of having a moment where I'm like, am I crazy? I don't know. So you know what? I emailed our very good friend, Mark Lewison himself, and was like, hey, Mark, listen, I just want to check myself. The family is Epstein. Brian is Epstein, correct? And guess what? Ding, ding, ding. I'm right. According to Mark Lewison, it's Epstein. This guy has devoted his life to researching the Beatles, for God's sake. He's done his homework. So it's Epstein for Mark Lewison. Now, the best part, right, Erica? I think this is pretty exciting.
2-3 days ago, this happens. Brand new evidence unearthed.
Banking news is breaking news. So, as Vivek has cited, the family says it Epstein. So we decided to ask a member of the family. That's right. I realized that I'm Facebook friends with Clive Epstein's son, Henry. He's probably not listening, but shout out to Henry if you are.
And that's Brian's nephew.
Brian's nephew, yes, Clive's kid. Erica and I were texting, and I was like, should I ask him? Should I ask him? And she was like, yes, definitely. So sent him a message, and I said, hey, I know that your father and your grandparents were Epstein. You're probably Epstein, but Brian was Epstein. Can you confirm? And yup, it's Epstein. And he said Brian was Epstein.
Yep. Written
100%. Written proof from the family. And Clive, who is Henry's father, was very, very close to Brian. They're a very close-knit family. Clive worked at NEMS after Brian died. Clive worked with the Beatles organization for a very long time. So it's not a situation where the family was estranged from Brian at all. Clive and Brian were close. Clive has been to Beatle fests in the past. Clive sadly passed on now. But so Henry Epstein, nephew of Brian, says Brian pronounced it Epstein.
I don't know what could be more definitive proof than that.
Yeah, we went straight to a primary source. That's it.
And also, there's nothing wrong with choosing a different pronunciation of your name. It doesn't mean you're estranged from the family. It doesn't mean anything other than you choose to pronounce your name in a different way.
Exactly. And the fact that Queenie was saying, it's Brian Epstein, that's ridiculous. It's not. I think my mom would say that if I decided to change pronunciation of my name. And in fact, my grandmother changed the pronunciation of my last name from Boren to Boron. Now rhymes with moron. Thanks.
My grandparents had 3 different pronunciations and 2 different spellings of the same name over 3 generations.
Oh my goodness.
It happens.
That's so funny. So this is very common, and it shouldn't be a big deal. It shouldn't matter as much as it does, but why it matters is because it mattered to Brian. I think if you call yourself a fan of Brian, a follower of Brian, if you're into Brian at all, learning about his life, if you're involved in history and writing history, it's important to get it right and to honor what he wanted.
Agreed. And especially on an audio medium like this, where we're able to talk about Brian, we want to address him in the way that he wanted to be addressed.
Exactly. And I invite anybody to start a discourse with us about this. I'm keeping it cool, but this shit gets me riled up. Feel free to email us, bcthebeatles@gmail.com. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. And if you want to go at it, fine. But I am pretty confident that we're right about this.
Yep, I totally agree, but welcome all conversation.
Exactly. I'm so glad we did that and got it out of my system, although, it never really will be until it's put to bed.
And it probably never will be put to bed. However, I think that having a definitive answer from a family member goes pretty far.
I think so, too. So after we wrapped our episode, we were very happy with the amount of evidence we'd collected. But one piece that really eluded us was Brian saying his own name. But after we posted the episode, the user at Mr_Epstein on Instagram, which is a great Brian account, you should go follow it if you love Brian, reminded us that actually in first US visit, he says his own name.
Yes, he does. So if you listen at exactly 30:45, you'll see a scene where Brian is dictating a letter to his secretary, and very softly, you can barely hear it, but he gives the salutation and he says his full name, Brian Epstein.
And the thing that caught my ear when I listened to it, it's like that vowel sound. So you can hear him very clearly say the I instead of E. But we're going to play it for you and you can, judge for yourself. But for me, that's what, even though he says it so softly and he sort of trails off, he definitely says the ein, the Epstein instead of the Epstein.
Yeah. So listen to it for yourself. Thank you to everybody who helped us along this name journey, from Harry Epstein, Brian's nephew, to Mr_Epstein on Instagram, our wonderful Beatles community who has helped us with this.
For real. Love you guys.
We feel like the mystery is 100% case closed, solved.
Yeah, exactly. Drop the mic, walk away level, I think.
So check out this clip. Check out Mr. Epstein saying Brian Epstein.
Now the cable there must be many things beyond cables. Stop boys and myself most appreciative of gesture. Regards and best wishes. Brian Epstein.
This lovely chap, Ronnie Dinelli, and I hope I'm saying your last name correctly, Ronnie. You're out here doing the fucking Lord's work, okay? He sent a lovely email. He sent a string of emails. The first email, he says, I'm a regular listener of your podcast. I love it. I love how you are educating people as to the correct pronunciation of Brian's last name. I found it easy to remember the proper pronunciation if you do a little song association. In this case, turn the Beatles' I Me Mine into My Name's Epstein. Okay, little background if you're a newcomer to our podcast, because this was a couple of years ago, but we did a deep dive into how to correctly pronounce Brian Epstein's last name. And yes, it is Epstein. It is not Epstein. That is the one thing that will get you bleeped on our show, is if you say Epstein. And I probably just got bleeped right there.
You did. You just got bleeped. You can say all of the swear words you want, but you say that?
Get creative with the swears. Yes, exactly. So if you say that, you get bleeped. So we did a special episode called How to Really Pronounce Brian Epstein's Last Name. And we collected all the evidence, all the hardcore stuff that will prove it is Epstein, not Epstein. No matter who tells you it's Epstein. I'm getting bleeped right and left now. It is not that. So if you have a hard time remembering it, Ronnie went a step further. He not only wrote a proper parody of I Me Mine lyrically called My Name's Epstein, he recorded it for us, which is amazing. It sounds fucking great. Let's have a little bit of a listen.
Holy shit.
Yeah. I love it.
Holy shit.
I want to make it my ringtone. That's so great.
It sounds incredible, and you'll never say it wrong again.
No, it's so Beatlesque. I think it'll probably be the thing it gets stuck in my head when I think about Brian now, which is such a big compliment to you, Ronnie, because I think about Brian a lot.
I think Brian himself would have loved it.
He would have loved it, yeah, because it would have helped people to remember how to pronounce his name, which, again, the reason we care about it is because Brian cared about it. Mm-hmm. So that's why it's important to remember Epstein. So we're going to post Ronnie's lovely ditty on our Instagram and other socials, along with, I mean, honestly, Ronnie, gift that keeps on giving here. He also made a 45-picture sleeve for the song with pictures of Brian on it, and it's fantastic. So we're going to post it. Please check that out at BC the Beatles everywhere. And thank you so much, Ronnie. It just gives me great joy, this whole menagerie of Brian-related paraphernalia. Your lyrics, your song, your picture sleeve, amazing. And thank you for listening and for just supporting my crazy crusade to correct people in the pronunciation of Brian's last name. And thank you again to Ronnie Dinelli, our amazing listener, for sending us that song. And again, we'll post it with the cover art that Ronnie made for it. And now we will never, ever forget how to pronounce Brian's last name.
Never.
Ever, ever. And hopefully, in spite of the movie, it'll at least be right in the zeitgeist of Beatledom.
Yeah, and if you want to have a debate about it, let us know.
I will die on that hill, like hardcore. I don't care which quote-unquote Brian experts say it's the other way. It's not. We've proved it. I'm ready to fight, so.
As we said a few years ago with the original, having the family send us a note, verifying it is pretty good proof to me.
Yeah, clarified by the family. So, and we've actually, I think, have had other examples sent to us, like other clips from press conferences and other things that Brian was privy to that verified again that people would say Epstein in his presence. That is how he wanted it pronounced because he didn't correct them and Brian would have corrected them. So yes, it is Epstein and that is it. The reason why we care is because Brian cared and Brian is very important to us. So
right.
Anyway, well, my God, now I have to calm down, take a deep breath. Whew, the thought of it. Anyway, thank you guys, as always, for listening to Because the Beatles. And as always, subscribe on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, wherever you're listening right now. And please give us a rating/review so other Beatlemaniacs can find us.
And follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter/X, TikTok, YouTube. We'll be posting photos and more from this episode and beyond. And remember, you can always email us at bcthebeatles@gmail.com. See you next time. Bye.
Bye.